Saint Faustina Kowalska, the apostle of divine mercy, close your eyes for a moment. Picture the glow of a single candle flickering in a quiet Polish chapel, the scent of old wood and incense hanging in the air. Outside, snow drifts against the convent walls, but within, a young nun kneels in silent prayer. Her name is Helena Kowalska, later known as Sister Maria Faustina, and the story you are about to hear is one of heavenly visions, whispers of mercy and miracles that would ripple across the world. If you've ever wondered whether God still speaks through the humble and the hidden, or whether miracles can bloom in the darkest times, stay with me tonight. Let this journey draw you in, and if you'd like to hear more sacred stories like this, remember, you're always welcome back here night after night for these journeys of the heart. Faustina was born in 1905 in a small village in Gagałig, Poland, the third of 10 children in a poor, hard-working family. Imagine the rural Polish countryside at the turn of the century, rolling fields dotted with haystacks, narrow dirt roads winding past wooden cottages, and the sound of church bells drifting across meadows. From an early age, Helena felt a deep calling to God. At just 7 years old, during benediction, she first sensed Jesus speaking to her soul. Picture a little girl, her hands clasped tightly, feeling a warmth beyond understanding. Though her family struggled to afford her schooling, her heart was already fixed on something beyond this world. In 1924, at age 19, Helena attended a dance with her sister. The music was lively, laughter filled the air, yet she felt an overwhelming emptiness. Suddenly, she saw a vision. Jesus, suffering, stripped of glory, covered in wounds, looking at her with sorrowful eyes. His voice echoed in her heart. "How long shall I put up with you? And how long will you keep putting me off?" She left the dance floor, ran to a nearby church, and prayed before the Blessed Sacrament. The decision was made. She would enter religious life. A year later, she joined the congregation of the Sisters of Our Lady of Mercy in Warsaw and received the name Sister Maria Faustina. Life in the convent was simple but demanding: scrubbing floors, cooking, gardening, enduring misunderstandings and illness. Yet, amid this humble work, heaven itself began to break through. Jesus appeared, clothed in a white robe. One hand was raised in blessing. The other touched his heart, from which 2 rays of light, one red, one pale, streamed forth. He said, "Paint an image according to the pattern you see, with the signature, 'Jesus, I trust in you.' Imagine the small cell glowing with unearthly light, Faustina trembling yet filled with peace." That vision became the divine mercy image, venerated by millions today. Though she was no artist, she persisted, later commissioning the painting with the guidance of her spiritual director. In 1935, Faustina was shown another vision, an angel sent to destroy a city as punishment for sin. She heard an interior voice teaching her a prayer for mercy that could hold back God's wrath. Eternal Father, I offer you the body and blood, soul and divinity of your dearly beloved Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. In atonement for our sins and those of the whole world, this became the chaplet of divine mercy. Picture Faustina kneeling, her beads slipping through her fingers as she whispers the words, for the first time words now prayed in every language on earth. Faustina foretold the Second World War, warning that a terrible conflict would erupt if humanity did not turn back to God's mercy. She once wrote in her diary that she saw a bright light over Poland, and beneath it, devastation and flames across Europe. There were smaller miracles too. Sisters in her convent testified that she sometimes knew their private thoughts or future events. One sister recalled falling ill. Faustina, without being told, prayed over her, and the illness passed quickly. Her health, however, deteriorated. She suffered from tuberculosis. Even in her weakness, she radiated peace, often smiling through pain. In 1938, she died at just 33 years old, leaving behind her diary over 600 pages of conversations with Christ. Even after her death in 1938, the story of Sister Faustina did not end. It was only beginning. For 2 decades, her diary remained relatively unknown. But then, miracles began to surface, quietly, at first, like sparks in the dark. In 1943, amid the horrors of World War II, Polish priests secretly circulated copies of her prayers. Soldiers on the Eastern Front, clutching makeshift rosaries, whispered the Divine Mercy Chaplet in muddy trenches. Many later testified that in the moments of greatest danger, artillery exploding around them, they felt an unexplainable calm, as if unseen hands shielded them. In 1948, a young doctor named Stanisław experienced a sudden, severe illness that baffled physicians. His family prayed the chaplet of Divine Mercy at his bedside, placing a small Divine Mercy image on the wall. By morning, he was completely recovered. His doctors called it medically impossible. The devotion slowly crossed borders. In the 1950s and 1960s, despite communist suppression in Eastern Europe, small groups risked punishment to pray the chaplet and display the image. Imagine candlelit rooms with curtains drawn tight, whispers of Jesus, I trust in you, carried like contraband hope. By the 1970s, Divine Mercy had reached America, thanks largely to the Marian Fathers of the Immaculate Conception. In Stockbridge, Massachusetts, a humble shrine began hosting Divine Mercy Sundays, drawing thousands. Picture the rolling Berkshire hills, spring flowers blooming. As pilgrims knelt before the now famous immaculate rays, seeming almost alive in the sunlight. One of the most famous miracles occurred in 1981. Maureen Diggin, an American woman, suffered from incurable lymphedema for over 20 years. Her leg was swollen, painful, and unresponsive to treatment. Doctors had told her there was no cure. She and her husband traveled to the Shrine of Divine Mercy in Poland. Standing before Sister Faustina's tomb, Maureen prayed desperately. She later recalled, "I felt a great sense of peace, like a weight had been lifted from me." That evening, she noticed her leg was normal. The pain vanished. Doctors confirmed her disease was completely gone. This healing became a key miracle in Faustina's canonization process. Pope John Paul II, himself Polish, was deeply influenced by Faustina's message. In 2000, on Divine Mercy Sunday, before a vast crowd in St. Peter's Square, he canonized Faustina Kowalska as the first saint of the new millennium. Picture the scene, the basilica's columns glowing in the Roman sun. Tens of thousands gathered, and the Pope's voice, firm yet tender, declaring, "Faustina, a saint." At that very moment, another miracle unfolded. In Massachusetts, Fr. Seraphim Mikolenko, who had worked on her canonization cause, received news that a boy named Bobby McGuire had been healed of congenital heart disease. After prayers to Faustina, John Paul II himself would later die on the eve of Divine Mercy Sunday, 2005, a detail many Catholics see as heaven's quiet signature on her mission. Today, Divine Mercy Sunday is celebrated worldwide on the first Sunday after Easter. Millions recite the chaplet at 3 p.m., the hour of mercy. In Manila, Rome, Warsaw, and Chicago, processions of faithful carry her image through crowded streets. Pilgrims travel to that Agonique, where Faustina's tomb now rests beneath a gleaming basilica. Imagine the vast crowd at sunset, candles, flickering voices joined in prayer in dozens of languages. A child tugs on her mother's sleeve, whispering, "Why are they crying?" The mother answers softly, "Because mercy has touched their lives." As night settles outside your window and the world grows still, imagine the quiet glow of a candle flickering in a small, polished chapel nearly a century ago. A young nun knelt there, her hands folded, her eyes lifted not in fear, but in trust. She had no wealth, no power, only a pen and her faith. Yet, through her, heaven whispered a message that would circle the globe. "Jesus, I trust in you." Tonight, perhaps that whisper reaches your heart, too. Picture golden rays spilling gently across the clouds parting. That is what mercy feels like, steady, patient, always arriving right when hope seems distant. If this story has touched you, let it be more than a memory. Hold on to its light. Carry its peace into tomorrow. Consider subscribing or sharing this moment with someone who might need it. Close your eyes now. Let Sister Faustina's journey be a lullaby for your spirit. Reminder that grace moves quietly through ordinary lives, weaving miracles in its wake. Rest in that thought and drift gently into sleep. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let your day begin to melt away. Imagine you are standing on a quiet hillside in Portugal, the air scented with wild thyme and olive trees. Tonight, I'll guide you through a story that has been told for more than a century, a story of light, hope, and gentle mystery, the miracle of Fatima. As you listen, feel free to let your mind drift. This is your time to unwind. If you'd like to experience more calming journeys like this, you're always welcome to return here, night, to let these sacred tales cradle you to sleep. It is the spring of 1917. The world beyond Portugal is caught in the turmoil of war guns echoing across Europe. Borders shifting like restless tides. But in the small, sunlit village of Fatima, life moves at a slower rhythm. Picture cobblestone paths winding between whitewashed cottages with terracotta roofs. Olive trees stand like ancient sentinels, their silver-green leaves shimmering in the breeze. Chickens scratch the earth, and a distant church bell marks the passing hours with gentle chimes. The hills of Cova da Iria roll like green waves under the sky, and at sunset, the whole valley glows in gold and rose. Here, 3 children tend their sheep. Lucia dos Santos, a thoughtful 10-year-old with curious eyes. Francisco Marto, her gentle, quiet cousin who carries a small wooden flute. And his little sister, Jacinta, bright and playful, her laughter like birdsong. They are simple children, their days filled with prayers, games, and the soft bleating of their flock. They don't know that the world is about to step into their meadow and never be the same. Imagine the cool grass beneath your fingers, the way the afternoon sun warms your face. The sky is a vast, endless blue. The only sound is the wind sighing through olive branches. Let yourself rest in that quiet place for a moment. It is a Sunday. The children have led their sheep to Cova da Iria. They play a simple game of building little stone walls. The air is still, and then a flash of light slices across the clear sky. At first, they think it's lightning strange, since there are no clouds. They gather their sheep, preparing to hurry home. But then comes a second flash. When they look up, they see her, a lady clothed in white, brighter than sunlight, standing upon a small home oak tree. A soft radiance surrounds her, not harsh, but warm and serene like moonlight reflected on calm water. She speaks, her voice gentle as a lullaby carried by the wind. Do not be afraid. I will not harm you. I come from heaven. Lucia, trembling but brave, asks what the lady wants, and the lady replies that she has come to ask for prayer for the rosary to be said daily, for peace and for the end of the terrible war. She promises to return on the 13th of the coming months. Visualize the scene, the children's wide eyes, the sunlight bending around a presence not of this world, and the scent of earth after rain. You might feel your own worries begin to fade, as though the lady's words of peace are reaching across time to you. News begins to ripple through Fatima. Some believe, some doubt. The hills become places of quiet anticipation. Each month, on the 13th day, people begin to gather: peasants, travelers, the curious, and the devout. They bring their hopes, their fears, their silent prayers. The lady appears again in June, July, August, and September each time, urging penance, prayer, and conversion. She speaks of a world in need of peace and faith, of hearts turned back to God. Francisco, ever quiet, seems to see more than he can say. Jacinta's heart is moved deeply. She whispers to her friends that she wishes she could comfort the suffering Jesus. Lucia, older and thoughtful, carries the responsibility of remembering every word, every detail. Imagine walking among the gathered crowd on a crisp morning. You hear the low murmur of the rosary being prayed, the rustle of skirts, the shifting of feet on dry grass. The air hums with expectation, and the sky seems a little wider than usual. The sky is gray, heavy with rain. Mud clings to the boots of tens of thousands who have come braving the storm. Some mock, some doubt. Others clutch their rosaries with white-knuckled faith. Then, around noon, the rain stops. A strange brightness pierces the clouds. The sun appears, yet it does not burn. Instead, it spins like a living wheel of fire. It dances across the sky, sending rays of color that wash over the stunned crowd. Gasps turn to cries. Some say the sun seemed to plunge toward the earth. For 10 long minutes, the heavens perform their silent hymn. Then, as suddenly as it began, the sun resumes its place, and the crowd realizes their soaked clothes are now dry. Picture the sky swirling with gold and rose, the awe on thousands of faces, the hush that falls when the world seems to breathe again. Even the doubters are silent. Something holy has brushed against the ordinary world. As you drift toward sleep, hold onto this image. A quiet village, 3 humble children, and a light brighter than any darkness. Fatima's message is not one of fear, but of peace and invitation to trust, to hope, and to believe in miracles. The fields of Cova da Iria are quiet again, but something has changed. The muddy ground where thousands once stood now feels sacred. The villagers speak in hushed voices about what they saw. Travelers return to their homes, carrying whispers of a spinning sun. In Lisbon, Porto, and beyond, newspapers cautiously report the event. Skeptics raise their eyebrows. Believers clasp their hands in prayer. But in the little cottages of Fatima, life still follows its gentle rhythm. Olive oil lamps flicker at night, and shepherd children still guide their flocks under wide, star-filled skies. Imagine the quiet of a Portuguese evening, the smell of baking bread mingling with wood smoke, the faint murmur of families gathered after supper. Somewhere, a flute plays a slow, tender melody that drifts across the hills. Let that image wrap around you like a warm blanket. Lucia, Francisco, and Jacinta are no longer ordinary shepherds. They carry messages the Lady entrusted to them, secrets of future events, calls for prayer, and visions that few can comprehend. Francisco, the quiet boy with the wooden flute, finds solace in prayer. He spends long hours in the small parish church, kneeling before the tabernacle, whispering prayers for sinners. His gaze often seems fixed on something unseen. Jacinta, bright and tender-hearted, becomes more serious. She offers small sacrifices, giving up food or drink or choosing discomfort, believing that even the smallest acts can comfort the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Lucia, older and practical, faces skepticism and even ridicule from some adults. At night, she gazes at the stars and wonders how her simple life became part of something so immense. Picture their tiny figures under the vast dome of the Milky Way, a flickering of distant constellations above, the cool earth beneath their feet. Even in their youth, they carry the weight of heaven's message. Soon, Francisco falls ill with the influenza epidemic that sweeps across Europe after the war. His frail body weakens, yet his eyes shine with a quiet peace. He tells Lucia and Jacinta not to be sad, that he will soon be with the Lady in heaven. In April 1919, at the age of 10, Francisco slips away quietly, a rosary entwined in his small hands. Jacinta, too, becomes sick. Her suffering is great, yet she bears it with remarkable courage for a child. In February 1920, she dies in a hospital in Lisbon, far from her village. Before she departs, she tells Lucia to remain and share the Lady's message with the world. Let your mind imagine a gentle night, a candle flickering beside Jacinta's small bed, the murmur of distant waves against the Portuguese coast, and the silent promise that light shines even in sorrow. Lucia grows into adulthood, entering religious life, and becoming Sister Lucia. Over the decades, she writes her memories, answers questions from church authorities, and keeps alive the call to prayer and conversion. Her life is quieter, now filled with prayers, letters, and the sound of chapel bells echoing across convent walls. The world changes, wars begin and end, borders shift, and generations come and go. Pilgrims travel to Cova da Iria, now a great sanctuary, their candles glowing like stars in the night. Imagine yourself among those pilgrims on a cool evening. You walk slowly, the flicker of your candle joining thousands of others, casting golden light on white stone paths. A breeze carries the soft strains of the Ave Maria. You feel a quiet connection to the children, to their lady, to something eternal. They are not harsh commands, but gentle invitations, like a mother calling her children home at dusk. Think of the sun at Fatima not as a frightening sign, but as a reminder that even the ordinary sky can become a canvas for the divine. As the music fades, picture, again, the hills of Portugal under a sky of infinite stars. 3 shepherd children once stood there, and the world was never the same. Let that thought cradle you tonight, the sense that miracles can touch even the simplest places, even the humblest lives. Years pass. The humble field of Cova da Iria is transformed. Where once only sheep grazed and children played, now a grand basilica rises, its white spire pointing toward the heavens. Stone walkways replace muddy paths. The air hums with quiet reverence as pilgrims arrive, women clutching rosaries, fathers carrying sleeping children, and young travelers walking barefoot in devotion. On warm summer nights, the sanctuary glows with thousands of candles. Their light dances on the marble columns, casting shadows that seem to whisper prayers. The fragrance of beeswax and fresh flowers mingles with the salty air from the Atlantic coast. You can almost hear the echo of distant bells calling the faithful to evening prayer. Imagine yourself among the pilgrims, your footsteps soft on ancient stones, the murmured prayers around you like a lullaby. You breathe in the warm Portuguese night and feel the weight of history and hope. The message of Fatima reaches the highest corners of the church. Popes through the decades speak of its importance. They dedicate the world to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Pilgrims witness processions where clergy in flowing white robes carry statues of Our Lady through seas of flickering candles. Think of a clear autumn night, the sky painted indigo, the basilica gleaming like a pearl, and the melody of the Ave Maria rising like incense into the stars. The world, fractured by wars and uncertainty, finds in Fatima a quiet source of peace. Beyond Portugal, devotion spreads. Shrines to Our Lady of Fatima appear in towns and cities across continents. In the Philippines, Brazil, Poland, and the United States, families gather to pray the rosary inspired by the shepherd children's courage. Picture a small church in South America's wooden pews, polished by generations of hands. Outside, tropical flowers bloom beneath a sky, alive with fireflies. A flickering statue of Fatima stands beneath a simple altar. Even here, far from Portugal, her message sings like a distant lullaby. The 20th century is marked by wars, revolutions, and fears of destruction. Yet, Fatima's message remains simple: pray, repent, trust. In the middle of the Cold War, when tension between superpowers threatens the world, many turn their eyes toward the lady who once danced the sun in the sky. Imagine a frozen European city at Christmas times, no dusting cobblestones, church bells echoing through the night. Somewhere, an old woman kneels before a tiny Fatima statue in her modest apartment. She whispers prayers for peace, her breath forming small clouds in the winter air. The world outside may be uncertain, but in her heart there is quiet hope. One of the most moving sights in Fatima is the nighttime candlelight procession. Pilgrims walk shoulder to shoulder, candles raised high, their flames trembling like stars caught in human hands. The statue of Our Lady of Fatima glides slowly among them, adorned with fresh roses. The rosary is recited in many languages, weaving a tapestry of voices across the sanctuary. Close your eyes and imagine the sound. Hundreds of voices murmuring the same words, the soft crackle of candle flames, and a gentle night breeze brushing your face. It feels timeless, as if heaven leans close, listening. Now, let the noise of the world fade. Picture yourself alone beneath a starlit Portuguese sky. The basilica in the distance, its white stones glowing faintly in the moonlight. The grass beneath you is cool and fragrant. Perhaps you hold a small candle, or maybe just your folded hands. You think of your own life, the worries, the joys, the questions that linger. The story of Fatima is not only about miracles witnessed long ago. It's a reminder that even in the ordinary fields, children and sunlight, the extraordinary can break through. Let the gentle night embrace you. Hear the faint echo of the children's laughter carried by the wind. The distant hoot of an owl, the subtle rustle of olive trees. In today's world, the roads to Fatima are alive with travelers. Some arrive on buses winding through the green hills of Portugal. Others walk for days, their footsteps steady on dusty paths lined with olive groves. Along the way, wildflowers bow in the breeze, and distant church bells echo across valleys. Imagine the sun dipping low as a group of pilgrims approaches the sanctuary. The basilica's white facade glows pink and gold in the fading light. The plaza stretches out before them, wide and welcoming, like open arms. The sound of footsteps on stone mingles with birds returning to their nests. As night falls, thousands of tiny flames bloom candles raised high, flickering against the dark. The pilgrims sing softly, Ave, Avenue, Avenue, Maria. The melody floats upward, tender and unwavering, like a prayer carried on the wind. In 2017, on the centennial of the apparitions, Pope Francis traveled to Fatima. Before a vast crowd, he canonized two of the shepherd children, Francisco and Jacinta Marto. Their images once of simple, barefoot children now adorned the grand basilica as saints of the church. Picture the moment, sunlight filtering through drifting clouds. The basilica bells pealing joyfully, and thousands of pilgrims waving white handkerchiefs like a field of lilies. The Holy Father's voice carries over the plaza, declaring the little shepherd saints for the whole world to see. Even in heaven, one can imagine Francisco and Jacinta smiling shyly, their hands clasped in prayer. The world still faces storms, conflict, doubt, division. Yet, Fatima's message echoes across generations. Pray for peace. Trust in God's mercy and believe that even the smallest hearts can change the world. Now, let your mind wander. Picture a quiet chapel somewhere far from Portugal. A single statue of Our Lady of Fatima stands bathed in candlelight. Outside, the night is cool and still. Inside, the air is warm and fragrant with roses. A lone visitor kneels, whispering prayers for loved ones, for strangers, for peace. As you listen, you might feel a sense of calm wrap around you like a soft blanket on a winter-esque night. The olive trees of Portugal sway gently in your imagination. The golden sun dances once again on the horizon, just as it did in 1917. Perhaps you carry your own worries, tonight things unspoken, burdens unseen. The story of Fatima reminds you that even in quiet, hidden places, grace can break through. Take a deep breath and let go. The flickering candlelight, the distant bells, and the gentle voice of this story are here to guide you toward rest. Before we drift off completely, let's pause for a final moment. May the peace of Fatima, the peace of a sunlit field, of children's laughter, and of a mother's tender caress upon your heart tonight. And may the message of hope carried from Portugal to the world shine gently in your dreams. Imagine the quiet hills of southern Italy at dusk, the sky blushing in shades of rose and lavender, olive trees whispering in the breeze, and the distant toll of a monastery bell echoing through the valleys. In the midst of this serene landscape, a story begins, one of wounds that bled without explanation, of souls read as though they were open books, and of a simple friar whose prayers seemed to bend the laws of nature itself. This is the extraordinary life of Padre Pio, born Francesco Forgione in 1887, a humble Capuchin friar who became a living sign of the supernatural. His stigmata, the visible wounds of Christwood, baffle doctors and draw pilgrims by the thousands. He would be seen in two places at once, whisper secrets of the heart to strangers, and heal the sick with nothing more than prayer and faith. But tonight, you are not simply hearing dates and facts. Tonight, you are stepping into a living tapestry of miracles. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let the gentle cadence of this story guide you into both wonder and rest. As you drift towards sleep, let the images form in your mind. Candlelit chapels, the quiet rustle of habits on stone floors, and the warm, golden glow of faith alive in a troubled world. Before we begin, I invite you, if this story moves your heart, to stay with us, to journey through these miracles to the very end. Like countless pilgrims who traveled far to meet the humble friar of Pietrelcina, linger here and discover why his life continues to inspire millions. Subscribe or follow if you wish to hear more stories like this, mystery and hope that carry you into peaceful dreams. Picture a small stone cottage in the rugged hills of Pietrelcina, Italy, in the year 1887. The air is fragrant with wild herbs, and the distant sound of sheep bells marks the passage of time. Inside that modest home, Francesco Forgione was born into a poor but deeply devout peasant family. His parents, Grazio and Maria Giuseppa, were simple farmers who wove prayer into the rhythm of their daily labor. From the very beginning, little Francesco displayed a spiritual sensitivity that set him apart. As a child, he would speak casually of seeing his guardian angel, describing the heavenly visitor with the same ease as other children might speak of a neighbor or a friend. At times, villagers noticed him standing perfectly still, eyes fixed on something unseen, his small lips moving in quiet prayer. The olive groves and winding paths of Pietrelcina became his sanctuary, a place where the boy often slipped away to converse with God in the soft shadows beneath the trees. In those early years, life was hard. Yet, even amid the hardship, there was joy. The laughter of siblings around a crackling hearth. The ringing of church bells calling the faithful to Mass, and the glow of candles flickering against whitewashed walls during evening devotions. These simple, sacred rhythms of rural Italy would shape the soul of the boy who would one day become Padre Pio. By the age of 15, Francesco felt a clear and undeniable calling to dedicate his life to God. He entered the Capuchin Franciscan friary at Morcone, a place where stone cloisters echoed with psalms and the faint scent of incense clung to every corridor. It was there, amid cold mornings and whispered prayers, that he donned the brown habit for the first time and took the name Pius, meaning pious, in honor of Pope Pius I. The novice years were not easy. Illness plagued him, mysterious weakness and fevers, and doctors alike. Many believed his frail body might not survive the rigors of religious life. Yet Pio pressed on, leaning on prayer as his strength. Even then, those around him sensed something extraordinary. Other friars would later recall seeing a gentle glow in his presence during prayer, as though the young friar carried a spark of heaven within him. The year was 1910. In the quiet hush of a small chapel, Pio, a young Capuchin priest, knelt in deep prayer after celebrating Mass for the first time. Outside, the hills of Campania glowed in the morning light, but inside, an unseen drama was unfolding. Pio later confided to his spiritual director that he had experienced an overwhelming sense of God's presence, so powerful it felt as though heaven had briefly touched the earth. Soon after his ordination, strange phenomena began to follow him. Fellow friars noticed a faint scent, like flowers or fresh bread. Whenever Pio prayed or passed by an aroma that lingered long after he left a room, pilgrims would later call this the odor of sanctity, a sign often associated with saints. At times, Pio seemed to possess knowledge he could not have obtained naturally. Parishioners came to confession and found him already aware of their sins before they spoke a word. His gaze, gentle but penetrating, left many trembling, as though their souls had been laid bare. Yet these early manifestations were just the beginning. Illness continued to torment him. For a time, he was sent home to Pietrelcina to recover, where he spent long hours in prayer beneath the familiar olive trees of his childhood. Villagers whispered about lights seen flickering in his room at night, as if angels themselves were keeping vigil. Even in those secluded hills, people began to sense that something extraordinary was unfolding. By 1916, Padre Pio was reassigned to the remote monastery of San Giovanni Rotondo. Perched on a windswept hilltop, the friary overlooked endless stretches of olive groves and rugged Italian countryside. It was here, in this quiet place, far from the world's stage, that some of the most astonishing events of the 20th century would take root. Imagine the friary stone corridors echoing with soft footsteps, the cold mountain wind rattling old shutters, and a lone friar kneeling in a dim chapel, unaware that his name would one day be spoken by millions. The first signs had appeared But the most dramatic was yet to come. September 20th, 1918. The world was still reeling from the Great War. In the remote friary of San Giovanni Rotondo, Padre Pio had just finished hearing confessions and offering Mass. The air in the small chapel was heavy with incense, and the afternoon sun slanted through the narrow windows, painting gold across the worn stone floor. Alone before the crucifix, Pio prayed with unusual intensity, his soul aching for the suffering of humanity. Then, without warning, the chapel seemed to dissolve into a blaze of light. Pio later described seeing a mysterious figure, radiant yet sorrowful, carrying wounds that pulsed with divine fire. A sudden, searing pain tore through his hands, feet, and side. He collapsed, trembling, realizing that he bore the same wounds as Christ's stigmata. Blood seeped from his palms, soaking his habit. The pain was excruciating, yet a profound peace washed over him. Word of the miracle spread quickly among his fellow friars. They were stunned to see the perfectly formed wounds, which bled fresh each day, yet showed no signs of infection or decay. Doctors were summoned. They examined the wounds, wrapped them, and returned days later to find the bandages soaked, but the skin beneath unchanged, always clean, always clean, always bleeding. Some physicians were awed. Others accused him of fraud. Investigations began, some harsh, even hostile. Imagine pilgrims trudging up the rocky paths to the friary, their hearts pounding as they approached a man they believed carried Christ's wounds. Some wept openly when they saw him raise his bleeding hands in blessing. Others fainted at the sight. Skeptics came to journalists, doctors, even spies sent by the church to expose a hoax. But time and again, none could explain the mystery. The stigmata would remain with Padre Pio for 50 years. He tried to hide his hands beneath gloves or bandages, feeling embarrassed by the attention. "I only want to be a poor friar who prays," he once said. Yet the wounds spoke louder than words, drawing thousands to confession, conversion, and healing. The villagers of San Giovanni Rotondo would later recall evenings when the friary seemed to glow faintly in the darkness, as if invisible hands were at work within its walls. The mountains themselves seemed to whisper, something holy was happening here. As Padre Pio's reputation grew, so did the crowds. By the 1920s and 1930s, San Giovanni Rotondo, once a quiet, wind-swept village on the Gargano mountainside, was transformed into a place of pilgrimage. The narrow dirt roads became rivers of pilgrims, mothers carrying sick children, soldiers haunted by war, farmers with weathered faces etched by suffering. They came for confession, for prayer, for a glimpse of the friar whose wounds mirrored Christ's. Stories of miraculous healings began to ripple outward like concentric circles on a pond. A woman, paralyzed for years, was carried into the friary on a stretcher. After Padre Pio blessed her and whispered a prayer, she stood, trembling, and walked unaided from the chapel. Witnesses wept, some falling to their knees. Another tale tells of a young boy, blind from birth, brought by desperate parents. Pio placed his wounded hands gently over the child's eyes and prayed quietly. When the boy blinked and cried out, "I can see," the small chapel erupted in sobs of joy. These were not isolated events. Pilgrims returned home to villages across Italy and beyond, sharing stories of healing, cancers that vanished, wounds that closed overnight, despair turned into hope. Conversions were even more common than physical healings. Hardened atheists, skeptics, even criminals found themselves undone after a single confession with Padre Pio. He was known to read hearts revealing sins or secrets the penitent had not spoken aloud. He told me things I had never said to anyone. One man later recounted, his voice shaking. In that moment, I knew God had found me. Imagine a dimly lit confessional. Padre Pio leaning close, his voice low and firm, sometimes stern, but always tender. Many left those encounters weeping not from shame, but from the weight of forgiveness lifting off their shoulders. Some returned home completely changed, mending broken relationships, returning stolen money, or dedicating their lives to serving others. By the 1940s, his influence had spread beyond Italy. Letters arrived daily from France, Spain, Germany, even America. Pilgrims waited days or weeks for a chance to speak with him. Despite illness and the constant pain of his wounds, Padre Pio never turned them away. He prayed over the sick, comforted the dying, and gently reminded each visitor, "Pray, hope, and don't worry." Even those who never met him reported extraordinary interventions. Soldiers at the front claimed they saw Padre Pio's image guiding them away from danger. Families swore they heard his voice offering comfort in moments of despair. These accounts, impossible to verify, yet told with conviction, added to the aura of mystery surrounding him. The friary itself became a place of quiet wonder. Violets wafting down from the monastery, even when no flowers bloomed nearby. They called it the odor of sanctity, a sign, they believed, that heaven walked close to earth. Among the most astonishing stories surrounding Padre Pio were the accounts of bilocation, the mysterious ability to appear in two places at once. Pilgrims, soldiers, and even high-ranking clergy swore they had seen him far from San Giovanni Rotondo, even as others testified he had never left the friary. One famous report came from World War II. An Allied pilot flying a mission over Italy claimed that, as he prepared to release his bombs, a figure appeared in the sky, a friar in a brown habit, his hands raised. The pilot was so shaken, he aborted the mission and later described the encounter to fellow soldiers, who recognized Padre Pio from a photograph. At the same time, witnesses in San Giovanni said Padre Pio had been in the confessional for hours, never leaving the monastery, gravely ill in Rome. The general later testified that Padre Pio appeared at his son's bedside, prayed over the boy, and then vanished. When the general visited San Giovanni to thank him, Padre Pio simply smiled and said, "You should be grateful to God, not me." These events became legendary, whispered among pilgrims and clergy alike. They spoke of him comforting prisoners of war, visiting hospitals hundreds of miles away, or appearing to nuns in distant conventual without leaving his cloistered life. Beyond bilocation, there were other supernatural phenomena. Visitors sometimes reported hearing angelic voices while praying near him. Some claimed to see brilliant light emanating from his wounds or face during Mass. Once, during the consecration, several friars described a radiant glow surrounding the altar as Padre Pio elevated the host. There were also stories of him engaging in spiritual battles. Fellow friars spoke of strange noises, footsteps, bangs, or voices in his cell at night. Padre Pio himself admitted that demons tormented him, throwing him from his bed or assaulting him physically. Yet he bore these attacks with humility and prayer, offering his suffering for the conversion of souls. Even skeptics who investigated him were sometimes shaken. Priests sent secretly by church authorities to observe him often left convinced of his sanctity. One visitor recalled that Padre Pio greeted him by name, though they had never met, and recounted a private prayer the priest had spoken silently hours earlier. Imagine the friary under the soft light of a mountain moon, wind whispering through olive trees, and within its stone walls, a humble friar kneeling on the cold floor, whispering prayers while unseen forces stirred the air. These tales of bilocation, lights, voices, and unseen battles deepened the mystery that surrounded Padre Pio, reminding the faithful that the supernatural does not always announce itself with thunder, but often with quiet wonder. In the aftermath of war, Padre Pio's heart burned with a vision, a place where the sick and the poor could find not only medical care, but dignity and love. In 1940, he shared this dream with his spiritual children to build a hospital in San Giovanni Rotondo. At the time, the idea seemed impossible. The region was impoverished, resources were scarce, and war had ravaged Italy. Yet Padre Pio's quiet conviction never wavered. Word spread quickly among the faithful. Donations began trickling in, some from wealthy benefactors, but many from farmers, widows, and workers who sent whatever small coins they could spare. Padre Pio often said it was not human strength that would raise the walls, but divine providence. Construction began in the late 1940s, but obstacles arose. Materials ran out, permits stalled, and funds dried up. Still, Padre Pio encouraged everyone, telling them, "The sick are Christ Himself. What you do for them, you do for Him." His presence seemed to infuse even laborers with courage. Workers would recount that when problems seemed insurmountable, Padre Pio's calm assurance gave them renewed hope. In 1956, the House for the Relief of Suffering opened its doors. Imagine the scene: the crisp Apulian sky, the mountain air fragrant with pine. Crowds gathered to see what faith and perseverance had built. The hospital was state-of-the-art for its time, with clean wards, skilled doctors, and a spirit of compassion that set it apart. Patients who entered broken or afraid often spoke of feeling an unexplainable peace within its walls, if the prayers that had built it lingered in the very stones. The hospital became more than a place of healing. It was a beacon of hope. Stories circulated of patients recovering unexpectedly, of families finding solace, and of the staff themselves feeling uplifted simply by working there. Padre Pio visited often, quietly moving among the beds, blessing the sick and whispering words of encouragement. Even today, the House for the Relief of Suffering continues to serve thousands of patients each year. Its reputation as one of Europe's leading hospitals remains, but for many, its greatest power is the sense of mercy and presence they feel within its halls, a living legacy of Padre Pio's faith. As Padre Pio entered his final years in the 1960s, age and illness began to weigh heavily on his frail body. His health had never been robust. Bronchitis, arthritis, and chronic pain were constant companions, but now, even the simple act of standing during Mass became an arduous effort. Yet those who saw him in these years described his eyes as luminous, as though suffering only deepened the light within him. The stigmata, which had bled for decades, remained, though at times the wounds would close slightly, only to reopen. Pilgrims still flocked to San Giovanni Rotondo by the tens of thousands. Many came out of curiosity, but even skeptics often left transformed. Reports of healings and conversions continued unabated. A child blind since birth, recovering sight after Padre Pio's blessing. A man crippled by paralysis, walking again after prayer. A young woman saved from a fatal illness she had been told was irreversible. One of the most remarkable accounts came from a man named Karol Wojtyła, then a young Polish priest, later to become Pope John Paul II. In 1947, Wojtyła visited Padre Pio and went to confession with him. Describing the encounter years later as profoundly moving. In 1962, Wojtyła, now a bishop, wrote to Padre Pio asking for prayers for a friend. Wanda Por Tosca, who had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. Shortly after Padre Pio received the letter, Wanda's doctors found her cancer had vanished, completely inexplicable cure she always attributed to Padre Pio's intercession. Despite physical weakness, Padre Pio never ceased his ministry. His confessional remained a place of grace. Pilgrims often reported that he knew their sins before they spoke them, gently yet firmly guiding them toward repentance. Even when exhausted, he celebrated Mass with a devotion that drew tears from those who watched him, his trembling hands lifting the host as though offering his very life. In September 1968, Padre Pio marked the 50th anniversary of receiving the stigmata. Pilgrims flooded San Giovanni Rotondo, sensing, perhaps, that his earthly journey was drawing to a close. On September 22nd, he celebrated his final Mass. Witnesses recall that he seemed unusually weak, his voice barely audible, but his eyes radiated peace. That night, he prayed the Rosary continually, whispering Maria, Jesus, Mary over and over. In the early hours of September 23rd, Padre Pio quietly passed away. To the astonishment of all, the stigmata that had marked his body for half a century vanished completely, his skin smooth and unscarred, as though the wounds had never been. Doctors examined him in disbelief, unable to explain what they saw. His death did not end the miracles. In the days and weeks that followed, countless pilgrims reported fragrances of roses and violet signs, often associated with his presence, lingering in the church or near his tomb. Many testified to healings or conversions after invoking his intercession. Padre Pio was canonized a saint by Pope John Paul II in 2002, the same pope who had once knelt at his confessional. Today, millions of pilgrims continue to visit his shrine. Stories still emerge, families reunited, illnesses cured, faith rekindled. In every account, there is a sense that Padre Pio's mission did not cease with his death, but continues, a reminder that holiness can outlast the boundaries of a single lifetime. Decades after Padre Pio's passing, the stories of his intercession have not only endured, they have multiplied, crossing continents and cultures. Pilgrims from South America to Asia speak of dreams, visions, and unexplained healings. To many, it seems, Padre Pio's mission to guide souls closer to God is more alive now than ever. In Italy, stories abound of the odor of sanctity, a mysterious fragrance of flowers or incense that people say suddenly fills the air when Padre Pio is near. Visitors to San Giovanni Rotondo have reported entering the church or walking past his tomb only to be overwhelmed by a heavenly scent, even when no flowers were present. For those who experience it, the fragrance is both a sign and a comfort, a gentle reminder that the saint who bore Christ's wound still watches over them. One woman from Brazil recounted how, during a sleepless night filled with despair over her terminal illness, she prayed to Padre Pio for help. She later described seeing him in a dream, standing at the foot of her bed, his brown capuchin habit flowing like soft cloth in a breeze. "Do not be afraid," he said, his voice calm and tender. The next morning, her doctors found no trace of the cancer. Another story comes from a young man in the Philippines who had been far from the church for years. After finding a small prayer card of Padre Pio in a dusty drawer, he prayed a hesitant, half-hearted prayer. That night, he dreamed of Padre Pio embracing him. He woke with tears streaming down his face and a renewed longing for God. Weeks later, he returned to confession for the first time in a decade. Even the digital age has not diminished Padre Pio's presence. Online communities and forums overflow with testimonies. A mother in Canada whose premature baby survived against all odds after she prayed a Padre Pio novena. A soldier in Ukraine who felt an inexplicable peace while clutching a Padre Pio medal in the chaos of war. A man in Nigeria who was healed of an addiction he could not conquer alone. In 2018, the church celebrated the 50th anniversary of Padre Pio's death with special masses, exhibitions, and pilgrimages. Pope Francis, visiting his shrine, described Padre Pio as a servant of mercy, who fought evil throughout his life with humility and obedience. The words echoed what countless pilgrims already knew. Padre Pio's life was not simply about miracles, but about leading people to deeper conversion and trust in God's love. San Giovanni Rotondo today is a place where the sacred and the ordinary seem to touch. Pilgrims kneel quietly at his tomb, some weeping, some smiling, many clutching rosaries or photographs of loved ones. The walls are lined with crutches left behind by those who no longer needed them. The air hums with whispered prayers in dozens of languages. For many, it feels less like visiting a distant saint and more like meeting a trusted friend. Padre Pio's legacy continues not only in miracles, but in the countless lives changed by his example, his relentless prayer, his deep compassion, his willingness to suffer for others. His story is a reminder that holiness is not an abstract idea, but something lived out in the messiness of human life, with all its pain, doubt, joy, and wonder. As the echoes of Padre Pio's life and miracles fade into the quiet of this moment, imagine yourself standing, once again, of San Giovanni Rotondo. The Italian hills roll gently beneath a sky painted with warm evening light. Pilgrims disperse, their whispered prayers lingering like incense in the air. Somewhere, a bell tolls a soft, resonant sound that seems to bridge heaven and earth. Padre Pio's story is not just about extraordinary phenomena, the stigmata, the bilocations, the unexplained healings. It is also about the ordinary. A friar who laughed with his brothers, who wept with the suffering, who sat for hours in a confessional to listen, encourage, and forgive. His life is a reminder that miracles are not magic tricks, but signs pointing to something greater, the infinite mercy and love of God. Picture his weathered hands, scarred, yet gentle, folded in prayer. Imagine the flicker of candlelight on the stone walls of his humble cell. Hear the distant murmur of a rosary, a hymn sung softly by unseen voices. Padre Pio's world was full of grace, breaking into the mundane proof that the divine is never far away. Perhaps his story stirs something within you, a long-forgotten hope, a question you've been afraid to ask, or a longing you can't quite name. Let that stirring speak. Allow the miracles of Padre Pio, only the wonders witnessed by others, but the quiet miracle of your own listening to open a door in your heart. If this journey through his life has inspired you, share it with someone who might need a spark of faith or a glimmer of hope tonight. And if you'd like to continue exploring stories of miracles, saints, and divine encounters, stay with us. There are many more tales waiting to unfold, each with its own light to offer. As we close, let the final image linger. Padre Pio's serene face beneath a capuchin hood, eyes lifted heavenward as though he still prays for your right now, in this very moment. His voice, gentle but certain, seems to whisper across the years. Pray, hope, and don't worry. Worry is useless. God is merciful and will hear your prayer. And so, beneath the same sky that once watched over a humble friar in southern Italy, may your heart be filled with peace, your spirit with wonder, and your night with rest touched by the quiet miracle of faith.